All right, let's move on now, talk about another story involving kids, and this one certainly got your attention last week, okay? So late last week, we spoke with Lyndon Dorval. He is an Edmonton physics high school teacher who was given a suspension and is actually facing termination now because he gave students zeros for work that they didn't hand in, assignments that they didn't get done. And he was a pretty big advocate of the fact that you need to hold high school students at that age accountable for their work. He was suspended because the principal of that school didn't believe in handing out zeros, felt it was bad for people's confidence. So let's give you a little bit about what Lyndon had to say, summarizing sort of how he got to this point.
When I first heard about it, I sort of questioned. It didn't seem all that logical to begin with. So I spent a fair amount of time researching, trying to find out where, because one of the claims is that this is research-based, that the research shows that this system works better. But in fact, when I started to research it, I found that there's no such thing. There is no research on it. It's simply a philosophy that if you give a student a zero, it damages them, it makes them give up, and therefore it doesn't work very well. But my experience is the exact opposite. I find that if I make it very clear to the students that they're responsible for doing something about it. I give them a zero, but it's only a temporary zero, hopefully.
I'm sitting here shaking my head, though. I really am, because I don't know how a student will understand the consequences of not doing an assignment if you just don't punish them for that.
Right. Well, see, the claim is with this system is that the students are then harassed and eventually get the work done. But in practice, that doesn't happen because there just isn't the manpower. We don't have the funding available to hire enough teachers to track these students down to get them to do the work. So it's one of those things that in theory sounds not too bad. In practice, it doesn't work very well at all, in my opinion.
Okay, so you decided to go ahead and give out the zeros anyway.
So I just kept doing it. I've always done this. So I just went ahead and did what I've always done and made the principal and made him aware that I wasn't going to be following this policy, and I didn't believe in it. I didn't even accept the idea that the principal had the right to tell me, because our school act in Alberta says that principals are to supervise evaluation. And somehow this word supervise has been incorporated or interpreted as meaning that the principal can give me directives about how to do marks. And I don't accept that as the meaning of supervise.
All right, so that was Lyndon Dorval when we spoke to him late last week about what happened to him when he decided to go ahead and continue to give students zeros. He did tell us that he received overwhelming support, particularly from parents. But you heard him talk about this philosophy that is out there, that to give zeros to children for assignments or high school students, whatever the case may be, sort of doesn't do wonders for their self-confidence. It's not a good thing. And in reading more about this, I came across the blog postings of Joe Bower, who is a teacher from Red Deer, Alberta, and he joins us now to talk more about this. And Joe, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So you believe in the idea that giving zeros is not a good thing?
Yes, I do. I don't see I see zeros as something that's at best unhelpful and at worst harmful to in particular the hardest kids to educate.
Okay, and why is that? What do you think happens when you give them a zero?
Well, I think there's two things that happen right away. First of all, when people say that zeros don't motivate kids, that's I don't agree with that. I think zeros do motivate kids. Unfortunately, what I've come to see is that they end up motivating kids to quit, and I'm not just talking about the kids that are doing well in school, because I don't think at the heart of the issue here, I don't think we are talking about the kids that get 1 0 or 2 zeros in a year or even in a school career. Those kids are going to do just fine, and those zeros might actually extrinsically motivate them to complete the work. The kids I'm really worried about are the kids that are already falling through the cracks in our school system. Alberta, around 72, 75% of the kids graduate, which means about 1 in 4 kids are not. So we're doing a great job of failing kids and providing an opportunity for them to learn those lessons, but I don't think it's benefiting them or our society. I think that we have to seriously look at alternative methods. And the other thing I think it teaches kids, it teaches them a lesson, and I think the lesson that it teaches kids is that you can get your way with people who are weaker than you are by hurting them.
That's an interesting concept, Joe. We have to take a break, but as soon as we come back, I want to talk more about exactly that, what you just said. Does the idea of giving zeros to students hurt them? We'll talk about that right after this. Welcome back. I'm Simi. Sara. We are talking about a story that came up out of Edmonton last week about a teacher, Lyndon Dorval, who was suspended and will likely be terminated because he was handing out zeros to students for assignments that they didn't do, work that wasn't done, homework and that kind of thing. He was receiving a lot of support from parents, but another teacher, Joe Bower, has spoken out to say that, you know what, giving zeros isn't necessarily helpful, and we are continuing our conversation with him. And Joe, thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
Now, you said that the idea of giving zeros can be hurtful to students. In what way?
Well, I mean, when we say that we want to hold children accountable or we want to teach them a lesson with something like zeros, we have to understand that those terms or those phrases we're using are really a code for where we want to punish children, and that's what a zero is that it is a punishment. We need to move away from this way of thinking that, you know, when kids do something bad, we must then do something bad to them. And we have to move towards, you know, this idea that we have a problem here, and how are we going to solve it together? But that requires some collaboration between the teacher and the student. And when the teacher is able to wield a zero, or any grade for that matter, then it really does emphasize the already imbalance of power between the student and the teacher.
Right, but how do you teach them about accountability for their actions? Because they're going to get out into the real world. They're high school students. They're not that far away from being adults. And nobody is going to think about hurting their feelings when they get out into the real world and they have to go to a real workplace.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that nobody's going to care about their feelings. I mean, I live in the real world right now, and I have a real job in the real world, and I work with colleagues that do care about me. I mean, they're not prepared to pamper me. I understand that. But I think we need to temper the idea that when you get in the real world, nobody cares about you. I don't live in that world, and I wouldn't want to live in that world. But as far as how do you teach responsibility or even accountability, it's really important to define the words. Quite often, too often, when we say we want children to be responsible, that again is really just code for do as you're told. Now, I'd like to re-examine whether that's a good definition of the term. But let's say we do have a good definition for the term responsibility. It's important to understand that children do not become responsible or good choice makers by simply following instructions or following directions. Children have to be given the opportunity to make choices. And quite often in school, I think most people who have attended school, and that's most of us, we remember how little choice and how little democracy you actually experienced when you were in school. So when we wield the punishments, it really does emphasize that adversarial relationship between teacher and student.
Okay, but how do we teach them about accountability then? I mean, if you as a teacher give them an assignment and they don't do it, well, that's not acceptable. How do you deal with that?
Well, my number one priority as an educator is I got to find out why, and there may be really terrible reasons. These kids are living very complex lives, and they're developing in all sorts of ways. So there may be very good reasons why something is not coming in as well. They're growing socially, they're growing academically, of course, that's the school side, but they're also growing physically and socially. So we have to understand that yes, we have our content bloated curriculums, and we have lots to get through, and most teachers will say there's too much. The curriculum is part of the problem here. It's kind of that bit of the 500-pound pink elephants in the middle of the room that we dance around. Teachers are placed under an exorbitant amount of pressure in order to get through a ton of content, and if class sizes are huge, then I understand that it is very tempting to move towards more efficient tools in order to get the job done. But that sometimes sacrifices the needs and the best interests of the kids. So how do we teach responsibility?
Yeah.
We have to work with them. We have to sit. We have to. This is why zeros get assessment wrong. Assessment is not a spreadsheet. Assessment is a conversation, and that conversation has to happen between the teacher and the student. There has to be face-to-face time between the two, because these children they don't need blank checks. They need our guidance, so that they can grow up to be well-adjusted people. Certainly, I mean, a caricature of what I sometimes talk about with the no zeros is to say, well, you want chaos and anarchy, and that's I mean, false dichotomies make it choosing easy. If you tell me that I can only choose between giving the kids blank checks and chaos versus me taking charge, I might even suggest that I would rather take charge. But the other alternative is to have a more collaborative relationship with the kids, where You are working things out with them, but yes, I agree. The teacher has to have time to work with the kid.
Yeah, exactly. But are we really doing them any kind of a favor here? I mean, they're going to go on to university or post-secondary, and nobody's going to stop and ask them, why didn't you get an assignment done?
Well, you know what? I think we have to be very careful that we don't hold K to 12 hostage to some of the barbaric and arcane practices of our post-secondary. I mean, I think that if you were to ask a lot of people who went to university and you asked them where in your education did you get some of the worst experiences, often sitting in those lecture halls with 400 other kids in there was the worst experience they had. I would be very, very leery of saying that we have to mold our K-12 system in the shadow of the way that things are still happening in post-secondary.
But you kind of are running up against a bit of a wall here, aren't you? Because, I mean, there's been a lot of support for what Mr. Dorval had to say. What kind of response have you gotten for your thoughts?
Well, they're mixed, of course, and I would imagine that they would be mixed on the other side too. We have to be careful that we don't get into an echo chamber too, where typically we only talk to the people we agree with, and we need to come together. We need to come together and we need to talk, and not in an adversarial way, but we need to talk about what are the real problems. Like I said, there are problems with class sizes, and there are problems with too much curriculum, and there's problems with high stakes testing that places a lot of pressure on teachers in order to get through stuff. I think these are conversations we all have to have, and I think this is a great opportunity. The mainstream media has really picked up on this, and I think this is a positive thing that we can talk about.
Is there a bigger issue here with parents too? I mean, if kids are missing assignments, shouldn't the parents be involved in making sure that the child is doing that work?
Yeah, I think that it's a shared responsibility between the sort of a triangle between the teacher, the parent, and the kid. I don't think any one of those is more responsible than the other. It's got to be a team effort. When one of those pillars falls down, I mean, you ask any teacher, what's it like to work with a kid that has kind of a broken home? It becomes very difficult, and so you have to have this tripartite where you've got the three working together. But I'm critical of a lot of elements of traditional education, including if we're giving the kids zeros, I would like us to at least entertain the question: what are we giving them a zero for? I mean, if I taught, and I've taught for 12 years, and in my 12 years, I know for a fact I have come up with some harebrained assignments. And I imagine in my 12 years that some of the tests and some of the assignments I came up with, and even the homework, wasn't all that good. And I would imagine, and I have given zeros in my career, that I probably gave a zero to a kid that I shouldn't have. At the very least, though, I want us to have a conversation. What is it that the kids are getting the zeros on? And if they're doing mindless worksheets every week, and hours of homework at night, I think these are conversations we need to have. It's not good enough just to say these kids aren't doing what they're told, because we've all experienced it. When we went to school, not all teachers are created equal, and they don't have all the same understanding, and they're not as all good at what they do. You go from one classroom to the next, and you're going to get a very different experience. So, at the very least, I'd like us to talk about what are the zeros for, because they might be really, really questionable stuff.
Well, I appreciate your coming on and talking about the other side of this issue. It was nice to have you.
Thank you very much.
That is Joe Bower, a teacher from Red Deer, Alberta, talking about why he doesn't believe in giving out zeros, unlike Lyndon Dorval, who we spoke with last week and has been suspended for handing out zeros. Lots of emails on this topic. I'm going to read them right after this.